Okay, I've always been saying that I don't really feel like the classic movies are all that attention grabbing.
But it's horror. It's a different genre, though.
I suppose so, especially when you have like one of the more beloved movies of the genre, um, in there, and one of the more inspirational ones. I say a lot more in verses than I do in reviews. I'm realizing.
It's about even.
So
I'm the one that sits back here and watches everything. It's about even.
It doesn't matter. I've been doing this for 2 years. I still get nervous, people. Leave me alone. 2.5 years now, really. Okay, so what we're going to do here is 2 haunted house movies. Yes, this probably feels a little familiar because I did do House on Haunted Hill's remake. That was a couple years ago now. So this we have the original William Castle movie, along with Robert Wise's The Haunting, which is the one we're going to start with. We're going to, I mean, of course, this probably does seem a little weird because when I did the House on Haunted Hill remake video, I did it with the remake of 13 Ghosts. And, of course, The Haunting has been remade, though not many people like to acknowledge that. So, in the event that you're wondering why I'm not doing the original 13 Ghosts with the original House on Haunted Hill, given that they're both Castle movies and the whole thing, and the fact that I did that in the video, it's because of no particular reason. That's why. So, The Haunting gets much more attention, I think. It's something that people are a lot more familiar with. Like, I've seen the original 13 Ghosts movie, but I really couldn't tell you a whole lot about it. But everybody knows what The Haunting is, and I think House on Haunted Hill definitely broke out a lot more than the other one did, so... but, having said all that, we're going to start with The Haunting. Which is, number one, it is the film version of the book The Haunting of Hill House, which, number one, kind of sounds similar to this. And secondly, I believe The Haunting of Hill House was actually published the year House on Haunted Hill came out. When The Haunting was 4 years later, I think, I want to say. And this was also Robert Wise kind of doing his, like a tribute to Val Lewton as well. So it begins, and it's obviously the story of, we have the doctor, and we have, who is it, Eleanor, I believe? I assumed you were looking at something, okay.
I can, if you'd like.
Okay, I believe the main character's name is Eleanor. This is a great fucking start, isn't it?
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that's what the main character's name is. So, they go into this house for this, basically to see if it's haunted. The remake really, really tried to make it complex, but it's really, really not. They go in there to see if the fucking place is haunted. So... they go in there, and there is a supposed medium of sorts, who is Theodora, and the heir to the house, who is Luke, who is Russ Tamblyn.
Yeah, I'm reading all this, so you're good.
Good. Okay. This is stuff I actually know. I just got stumped for a second on Eleanor's name. So I'm good to go now. So when the movie starts, though, isn't there. We actually go, and there are these really creepy segments where we get the house's history. Where it was, I want to say, like 90 years ago or something. People just started dying in random ways. The wife died before she even got to the house. There was the daughter who ended up dying, supposedly because she was neglected by the housekeeper, and then the housekeeper ended up hanging herself. The owner of the house, Crane, drowned somewhere. It's all just mysterious deaths in this really, really kind of foggy prologue we have going on, which really kind of really has that atmospheric kind of haunted house. This is kind of like the quintessential haunted house movie, the one that kind of all the other haunted house movies kind of take from. I not even thinking about the fact that I was about to do this video, mentioned it in Crimson Peak review as well.
Yep.
So, now the thing about this movie is that it is widely considered, even by like the most hardcore people, to be like one of the scariest movies of all time. Which is an interesting reputation for it to have. there are definitely moments like that. The whole number one, to start us off completely, like when she first gets to the house. I've always liked that line. It's a very simple line, but there's just such a sinister tone to it. The whole she pulls up to the house and she's saying, you know, there seems to be nobody in the house, and the caretaker there by the gate says, "There's no one in there you'd want to see." And you just kind of, that's kind of the first hint you get after the prologue of something kind of lurking. And then they do this very clever thing where once they're in the house, and the layout of the house is massive. It's basically like, you know, a giant maze inside. But then they have, like, the walls and the door frames are kind of almost like askew in a way. And they're at certain angles to where the doors can, like, open and close themselves, supposedly. So there's always... It's one of those cases where anytime something supernatural happens, they leave room open for it to have a logical explanation. And, of course, we have to... we spend a lot of time inside the mind of Eleanor, who is experienced a poltergeist when she was younger, so she feels like this is kind of... She feels a connection to the house and kind of feels like somehow, some way, it's old territory for her. So the real question throughout the entire movie is the house haunted, or are we just watching Eleanor completely lose her mind? So, because it's always kind of unsure what just she hears and what everybody hears or sees, which is kind of the approach that obviously this took and everybody loved about it, but all the movies that it has inspired seem to not care about. It's all about real ghosts now. You can't sell a movie now unless it has real ghosts, and you can't do the whole maybe there's ghosts, maybe there's not thing. Which both of these kind of do. So, and that's, and just kind of watching this, as you kind of watch her descend as the movie goes on, the more and more that question is raised. Like the creepy dancing scene. That is, yeah, you kind of get a sense, that's where there's kind of a point in the movie where there's a lot of uncertainty, but once, at least for me anyway, once that scene hits, I kind of start to lean towards, I kind of like the theory that there's no ghosts in the house, and just how easy it is to be able to go through with that and see it that way. But then again, still, there's plenty of creepiness to go around. There's, of course, the really famous scene where there's... Eleanor is in bed, and then she's starting to freak out and can hear things in the dark. And she's holding what she thinks is Theodora's hand. And as this is going on, her grip is getting tighter and tighter around her hand. And then everything stops, and the lights come on. And Theodora is in bed on the other side of the room, and Eleanor is laying on the couch. And just that delivery of once again it's a very simple line, but just her delivery of whose hand was I holding is that big, you know, that big moment of realization. Another moment of realization is that another way where you can kind of sense that she has some kind of weird connection she feels with the house is the moment towards the beginning, which is kind of one of the first moments when they're in there. There is a knocking on the wall, and she thinks as she's waking up, she thinks it's her mother who's dead now, and it's just her waking her up, and she's in her house and everything, and she sits up as if she's going to go about her normal day until she realizes that she's in this house, and just that moment of realization on her face when she wakes up and realizes where she is, in contrast to where she thought she was, and how terrifying that is, at least from the beginning. Talking about Theodora's character, there's a thing a lot of people like to make a big deal about, but it's never really something that I don't know. The idea that her character is a lesbian, and so the closeness between her and Eleanor is kind of... there's like an ongoing, I guess, sexual tension thing here. I don't know. People like to put sexual tension in movies where there's sometimes not, but you know, if you want to see it that way, I'm sure. Yeah, it is. There are certainly implications when you watch it, but yeah, for the most part, I think it's, you know, something that's a little tiny bit blown out of proportion because people just fucking love lesbians. And it's a very, I just kind of love how old-fashioned, obviously it's not, at the time, this is just what it was, but nowadays it's considered old-fashioned, where when she hears noises in the dark, it's like that really, really, now infamous just moaning ghost sound that's just kind of like a stock sound now. But they do manage to make it really creepy in the context of this. And of course, among all this, we have Russ Tamlin's character, who is basically the comedy relief. He's actually successful comedy relief, unlike in the remake when he was Owen Wilson. Russ Tamlin keeps his head in this movie, by the way, in case you were wondering. But anyway, because there's the moment, like, this is one of those moments that they all witness, where you have to question it. Once again, it could just be how distorted the house is in general. But there's the banging on the door to where the door starts to actually, like, bend in the middle, like something's trying to break through. And we get that cut of Russ Tamlin who's saying, like, you know, Doctor, I'm gonna just let you have this house for a really cheap price now. We don't have to, we don't have to go through any of the expensive stuff. Just take it. But then there are some moments also, like, the use of the spiral staircase, which once again is now really, really popular to do in movies such as this. But they use it in this really, they use it in ways that mess with my vertigo, of course, which is a good way of doing that, and it's very, just the way they shoot the scene in general is very, very disorienting, which really, really fits the context of what's going on. I guess it's worth also throwing in real quick that the Doctor's wife appears in the second half, who is Lois Maxwell, who got famous for playing Moneypenny in most of the Bond movies. So there's that. But yes, having said all this, I don't know if it's just the era I grew up in or whatever, but listen, I can totally, absolutely 100% appreciate it for being like a psychological thriller type. And having those moments in it that have been, you know, copied over and over and over again by much, much lesser movies. And once, like I was talking about with the moaning, among many other things, the use of sound is really, really well done too, especially since most of it is stuff we don't actually see. And that's where a lot of the horror comes from. I never really got where this movie was so frightening to people. Because this is an incredibly beloved movie. Like, you have no idea. Like, it wasn't until I just kind of, like, went into the depths that I was like, this movie has a huge following that's really, really passionate about it. And consider it, like, one of the scariest movies ever made, if not the scariest movie ever made. And I've never... I can easily acknowledge what's really creepy and, like I said, in ways disorienting. But I never really kind of, like... A lot of the reviews you see, like, one of the famous, like, critic quotes that always comes from it is, don't watch it alone, ever. I don't really get that vibe from this movie, but there's still, like, modern day audiences that absolutely see it that way, that aren't in any way, you know, taken by what all is around them. They still see it for exactly what it was back then, and see it as really, really effective in that way. It's never gotten me that way. Which saddens me, because I'd really like to see what other people see it. I'd love to be that freaked out by this movie, but I guess it's just because I'm so keen on the taking the psychological approach, where it's just her having a breakdown as opposed to there actually being ghosts in the house. I don't know, but that prologue is really, really damn creepy, though. So there's that. So I don't love it in the way its incredible fan base takes to it. But I can certainly acknowledge what it did for the genre and how it's, you know, definitely been an inspiration, and for good reason. So, that brings us to House on Haunted Hill, which is kind of a totally different thing. Not exactly. House on Haunted Hill is another one of those ones where you can kind of, there's kind of a debate about whether there's actually ghosts in the house or not, or if it's just, instead of a psychological thing going on, it's more along the lines of whether Vincent Price and his wife are just playing games on everybody. Because they invite, well, okay, for starters, once again, another movie where the prologue is really, really creepy. So much so that this movie was also just as inspirational to the genre. The very first scene of this movie, before Watson Richard and Vincent Price's character come on and tell us what's going on, it's just a black screen with the sounds of screaming and ghosts moaning, and then after that kind of dies down, you just hear chains dragging and heavy footsteps. And there's really nothing to this, it's just the sound effects that you're supposed to assume lurk inside the house. Whatever lurks inside the house is what's making the noise you're hearing in this little prologue. And it's really, really bullshit, because it's what they use now as, like, stock sound effects for, like, haunted houses and shit, for, like, Halloween. But even still to this day in this movie, it's a really creepy opening that I've always loved. And of course the setup is, it's this house that there have been 7 murders in, and obviously there's apparently things lurking around in it, so Vincent Price and his wife invite these people over for a party, for her, supposedly, and will give $10,000 to anybody that stays the whole night and leaves, if they're still alive. And, of course, we have all these things, like we have the little coffins that have guns in them, and we have the odd vat, the mysterious vat of acid that's in the cellar, where he demonstrates by throwing a rat in and it just disintegrates down to the bone immediately. Well, the one thing that really makes this movie work is the kind of banter going on between Vincent Price and his wife, and how that kind of shapes what may or may not be happening in the rest of the story, where they have this extremely humorous banter where supposedly he's gonna just open a bottle of champagne for her, but then he points it at her and gives this idea of, wouldn't it be interesting to see, you know, the news headline that said millionaire's wife mysteriously killed with a champagne cork? Wouldn't that be weird? And then the point gets brought up where apparently she tried to poison him once. So this is just a game that goes back and forth with them that could grow extremely deadly, and all these people are in the house with them, and we don't know if the terror is them fucking with everybody, or if there's really ghouls afoot or whatever. And of course she has the line as he's leaving, the only ghoul in this house is you, and stuff like that. It's very, obviously it's very dated today, but at the same time it just really works in the context. Especially with an actor like Vincent Price in this part.
And I can hear him say that.
Now the one thing is the characters aren't very interesting. We have the 2 of them who are great, and then we have the rich guy, and we have Watson Pritchard, who is the guy, like the one guy that really, really absolutely believes that there are ghosts in his house and that he's seen them and that they're coming for all of them. And then we have the other 2 female characters who are just here to scream very, very loudly. And they really don't go any far beyond that, but the movie is a really, really swift runtime, and just kind of plays about the status it's brought us to as of now. This is, and of course there are some interesting scenes in here. For the first half of the movie, we're under the impression that the people who are like the ghouls and the goblins are actually just the caretakers who haven't left yet. Mm-hmm. And the reason they were walking around, the woman was walking around so creepily like this, is because she's blind. And but then we have scenes where she like finds a severed head in her suitcase, and then she goes back and looks and it's gone. It's stuff that's really, really cliche now, but back then scared the holy shit out of people. And speaking of stuff back then that scared the holy shit out of people, this was apparently the start of the movie where Castle was known for his gimmicks, especially when his movies were in theaters. So the big scene in this movie that everybody knows, where the skeleton comes walking out and kind of ends up pushing Price's wife into the vat of acid. When you went to the theater back then, there was a skeleton that would fly over the audience's head when that happened. I guess he was kind of like the godfather of that, having the whole stuff like that happening in the theater experience. Stuff that's explored in stuff like Matinee and Scream 2 and stuff like that. It's very, it's obviously there's a really big amount of campiness to this. Like, that's the whole, like, you can look at the movie and say it's dated, but I'm pretty sure all the campiness is just, Castle just kind of, throwing more fun into it. And to kind of match the campiness of it, there's a lot more camp than there is creepiness, but there's certainly some creepiness to go along with it. Just like how, you see, like there's the moment where the monster hand comes from around the corner. We never learn what that was, I don't think. But then there's the moment where one thing is creepy in one way, but then a reveal shows that it's still extremely creepy, but in a totally different way. And it's the whole, when the skeleton rises out of the acid and comes after her, you're under the impression that it's Vincent Price's skeleton talking to her as it chases her. And you're like, well, that's stupid. But then it's revealed that it's actually Vincent Price that killed the rich guy that she was seeing behind his back and who was plotting with her to kill him. And it's actually his skeleton that Price was using like a puppet to scare her. So still, it's kind of it's creepy to an extent when you think it's Price, but you also know it's kind of stupid. But then you realize that it's him using the human skeleton of her lover to scare her. Then it gets creepy again. So that's great. And yeah, to add to that campiness also, it's another one of those movies that has like, it's the very unsubtle, horror score, where it's just like, the score is literally like some dude just pounding on a piano. But it just kind of adds to the whole campy quality of it. So yes, there's a lot. The idea that, they're brought to the party in, hearses is a nice little creepy thing going. There's definitely a back and forth with the comedy factor and the legitimately creepy factor. There's a nice juggling going on here. Having said that, I have a lot more fun watching House on Haunted Hill, but The Haunting is definitely more admirable in its approach to exactly how it handles. Maybe there's ghosts and maybe there's not, and just the whole psychological factor of it. And it makes the fact that it's basically dealing into obviously you have comedy and horror going on over here, but the way they kind of take a more complex way about the more complex plot of doing a psychological thriller on top of the horror is probably just a little more. It just depends on the movie, but in this particular case, this one's probably just a little more impressive in regards to that. So, a lot of people, this is absolutely no contest, but I like them both in, for their different reasons and how they handle what they have going on. So,
sounds good. So ends another edition of Versus, and next week we're going to find out what happens with a silver bullet. Yeah, that's the best way I can do it without giving anything away. And we will be rolling right into November then. Oh my god, it's crazy. Versus in November starts next week. So that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls up there for watching. And
it's worth noting, now that you bring that up, that you... when I started this, I really didn't have a lot of faith. I was just like, I'm just going to do this until I can, get in the direction that I need to go.
Obviously.
And I remember sometime at the end of last year, you called me up and you were like, dude, we've got Versus to to the very end of 2015. And I just kind of laughed it off. I was like, I kind of really hope I'm not doing that by that time.
Wade Barrett has something to say to you, sir.
Yeah.
But we have fun every single week here. Even though it's a lot of work, it's still a lot of fun, because I know you enjoy talking about movies.
And I'm still getting paid.
I have no idea what you're talking about. And until tomorrow, boys and girls. That was random.
Yeah.
AJ, any parting words?
Yes, okay, that's it now.